Welcome everyone to SVK Network. I sound like I'm in a tunnel. I don't know what that is. Maybe it's my speakers, whatever. Anyways, welcome everyone to the Restaurant Business Show on the SVK Network. Jim, do you like that opening? Did that work for you?
I like that. Yeah. How you doing, Jay?
I'm like in a boardroom. I feel weird. I usually have like neon light signs behind me, fridge or two with Red Bull. But
yeah, this looks very professional.
Does that look professional? Well, it's a professional show. So we have our next guest on. Why do I sound like I'm in a tunnel? Anyways, oh, there we go. That's better. And so first of all, our guest here, first of all, thank you for bringing our guest on. But honestly, this is the first guest I can actually pronounce their name.
Jim Taylor and name too.
It was like Derek Smith. I can do that one. Yeah. Right on. Awesome. So do you want to introduce who do we have coming on the show today?
So Derek, well, first of all, Derek and I have a long history together on lots of different projects in different businesses in the restaurant industry. So we've known each other for a long time, and he's just doing some great stuff with, he's the founder of a company called Canopy Metrics. So, we should probably let him explain exactly what they're doing, but basically they're helping, analyze information and really just help restaurant groups understand what's going on and how they can understand information better. I'm probably butchering that, but he'll be able to explain better.
Derek, is he butchering it in the green room? He's in the green room. That's for sure. He's in the green room, probably going, oh boy.
He's going, Jim, just let me do it. Yeah.
I usually butcher your stuff, so it's fair. It's all fair. So we're gonna break for commercial, and we're gonna come back, and then we're gonna bring in Derek Smith, and then we'll talk about all the great stuff that he knows. And you said he's the smartest guy in the industry.
He might be.
I was always referring to you as the smartest guy in the industry. So
yeah, he definitely takes the cake, I think.
Does he? Okay, cool. All right, let's go back. Watch this. Is really good. This is stir. Here we go.
It's not about turning on the lights, starting the grill, and prepping the food. You put on an apron, flip the open sign, and ready for the day. Regulars sit at the same spot and tell stories that bring smiles. Some days can be chaos, challenging. You persevere because you have an undaunted passion, a calling to make people feel welcome and warm. Guests come and go, some you may never see again. The restaurant business is heaven and hell. It's laughter and tears, forever changing and extremely challenging. When the day is done, feeling exhausted, yet somehow content, you smile, knowing tomorrow you get to do it all again, and you wouldn't change a thing.
All right, we're back, everyone. SVK Network. Do you like the commercial, Jim?
There's some emotional trigger there, man. That's.
Yeah. Hey, have you seen, Derek? Before we get into your stuff, have you guys seen the Dove commercial? I put it on my LinkedIn about the new Dove commercial about how the internet, like social media, has ruined young women and their like anorexia. It's very powerful, by the way. Watch it on my LinkedIn. It's really, really, really powerful. So, anyways, Derek, over to you. So, Derek, who are you? What do you do? What's your company? That was great.
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me, Jay. I thought Jim did a pretty good job. We practiced that quite a bit, and I think that he got it almost spot on. So, thanks, Jim. I don't know about the smartest person in the industry though. I think already met quite a few people smarter than I am. So. Most actually, in fact, but
most.
Yeah, no, I'm the founder of a company called Canopy Metrics. Essentially what we do is, help businesses, primarily restaurants, utilize data more effectively, just to make more profit. When you look at the restaurant industry, average restaurant produces millions of points of data a year, and I would say that for the average owner or executive team, utilizing that information effectively is pretty difficult. So that's my specialty, and it's an area of the business that I really enjoy, and I think there's a lot of potential there when it comes to profit, revenue, cost reduction, optimization.
Derek, I got a list of questions for you, man.
I'm excited.
I'm like, holy cow! Like, this is, first of all, thanks, Jim, for bringing Derek on. So, Derek, what is the how much money do people leave behind without looking at analytics and stuff like you do when it comes to profits?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's difficult to answer for sure. I think that most of us that have been looking at a P&L in the restaurant industry for a while could look at labor and cost of sale and say generally it's this percentage, generally it's that percentage, and profit margins are definitely squeezed, right? But there's so many other nuances to profit in a restaurant and areas of opportunity within a restaurant where you can kind of squeeze the lemon. Manage your controllable costs, things like janitorial expenses. Like when you start to look at a P&L as 100 different opportunities for profit, you can kind of start to see that there's quite a bit of potential in a lot of restaurants in areas that people just don't typically analyze.
Why do you think that's the case, Derek? Why do you think that's the case?
I think it's a capacity issue. I think that for a lot of restaurant, let's say executive teams, when it comes to things like reducing labor costs, that in itself is a monumental task. And for a lot of executive teams, they don't really have the tools that can make that process easier. They don't have the performance measurement plans that are well organized and well thought out to be able to extract the insights quickly. So what happens is you end up spending all of your time on these very industry specific metrics like labor cost percentage, and it's just like a hamster on a wheel, right? It's like, I just don't know how to solve this. We're not making it better. And then all of a sudden the government comes through with another minimum wage increase and you're right back to, struggling to maintain your labor cost percentage again. So, I do think it's a capacity issue. It's a not utilizing technology to its full potential. And also I think for a lot of restaurants, they just don't have someone that can specifically look at these issues. They're burdened with 1,000 other tasks. So yeah, those are some of the general reasons that I've seen anyway.
Awesome. Jim, I'll let you ask the next question because I got my list here.
When Derek and I get together, not on a podcast like this, we could sit for hours and talk about something because, there's some synergy between, my business and his. So we get along really well and having lots of discussions. But Derek, maybe, you and I have talked a lot about the whole concept of really good KPIs and making sure that targets are responsible and what they should be. Maybe touch on that a bit.
Yeah, for sure. We've talked a lot about Jim and I, and Jim, you're the best that I know in this regard. Talking about retention, labor retention, and one of the biggest challenges that I see when it comes to restaurant managers is that executives can be very good sometimes at creating very high level sort of strategic objectives, and then those objectives get passed on to regionals, and regionals create what they think are pretty good ways of being able to accomplish the executive objectives, and then it gets down to the restaurant, and then they create what they think is the right idea to accomplish the regional objectives. And what happens is it kind of gets the objectives and the benchmarks, the targets sort of get distilled as they go down that hierarchy, right? And I think what happens is you end up giving KPIs and targets to restaurant managers that potentially don't have the level of cohesion when it comes to how they interact with executive objectives. And also I don't think that restaurant managers really have the tools to be able to execute properly when it comes to some of these targets and these KPIs, right? Take labor cost percentage as a prime example. It's one of the hardest things to action against. And what we'll do is we'll say to a restaurant manager, I want you to maintain call it a 14% front of house cost or labor cost percentage. And then that's it. That's what we leave them with, right? And the general manager has to sit back and go, okay, well, I did 14.5 last week. So what do I do to decline that by 0.5, right? So what naturally happens is they just go to the easiest thing that they can think of. I guess I just have to use less labor.
Yeah,
right?
cut hours. Cut hours. Boom.
Cut hours, right? And Jim, you've done such a great job at focusing on that area of the business. But I think that is a core problem that we have in the industry. Is we are very good at being able to come up with objectives and come up with benchmarks, but then it kind of stops there. And really, what happens is a lot of these KPIs like labor cost percentage, there's 50 KPIs below that will help inform that, sort of macro metric, right?
So Derek, that's a really interesting question. Is how much so what's the step after this then? So we get the information from you, we apply it. How do we stay with you with all this information that comes through, or is it just always changing and you have new ways to handle with it?
Yeah, I think the easiest way to be able to answer that is really with like the kind of basic strategy of how you make this all sort of work. And this is very, very generalized, right? But really what should happen is, we should have a very good idea of how profit sort of rolls up from these like base level KPIs, right?
Yeah.
So you look at revenue, for instance. Revenue can be broken down into covers and average check. Well, average check can be broken down into, a whole bunch of metrics like upsell and ad percentage, categorical breakdown of the average check. Like there's all these ways to be able to analyze that further. So what you really have to do as a business is think about like, what are going to be the key ways that we can influence average check this year? Let's say it's upsells and ads. Okay, well then just use that KPI, and make sure you have the information that can support that and it comes frequently and it's visualized correctly. But just use that KPI, maybe a couple others, and then give those to your team and say, just focus on these. We don't need you to focus on all 100 of them. Let's focus on these 3 and see if we can influence average guest check that way. And I think that's a fundamental component of this, is that managers have to understand why it is that you're analyzing the metrics that you're analyzing. They have to be involved in the benchmarking process. But then they also have to have tools that can allow them to be able to look at this frequently so that they're able to correlate, I changed this task and therefore it gave me this output, right? And I think that's a really big missing component in the industry, is that a lot of managers try and change something, but they don't necessarily see how that influences their KPI at the end of the day.
Do you find, now I remember hearing this a few times as well, is how much do you have to listen to the information you're getting through analytics and looking at your KPIs based on more of that feeling of what's going on within your restaurant?
Yeah.
Because I've read stuff. It's like, the numbers tell you one thing, but there's also this. Is that true? Is that statement still true?
I think that when you look at some of the best restaurants in the industry, they were started well before we had all of this data available to us, right? They were started by, founders, owners that relied almost entirely on intuition and gut feel, right? I think that plays an enormous part in the industry still, because what data can tell you is, this is what using data, this is the best guess at how this will this action that you're about to implement will affect your business, right? But there's a lot, that's just an objective reality that data can tell you. That's what data is very good at, is showing objective reality. The side of the business that's still very important is that subjective component. How does this feel? How does this, if we add this, this pizza onto our menu and we're not like really known for pizzas, how is that going to impact the way that people sort of interact with our brand? And is this on brand? Is this not on brand? Those are some elements of the business that I don't think can ever really be replaced by data, because they're subjective. It's just gut feel, it's intuition.
Can I chime in on that?
It's like money, but it's like Moneyball, Jim?
For sure. I think, if you think about, like Derek's saying, there's still that major subjective component in restaurant. If you think about a manufacturing facility or like a bottling plant or something like that, I mean, it's straight output, right? It's product in, product out. And in restaurants, there's like Derek was saying, there's so many nuances and there's so many things to consider, like what can the manager control and what can't the manager control? If the manager focuses on serving one more group of customers based on not losing people at the door who are given, lengthy, inaccurate quote times, they can directly impact revenue and labor costs. But if I walk into a restaurant and sit at a table and you walk into a restaurant and sit at the next table, you order filet mignon and I order chicken strips, they can't control that, right? So there's so many factors that are controllable or not controllable. And an analogy, Derek, you'll probably remember this, that we used to use back in the day about how managers would a really good, well-run restaurant versus, a restaurant that maybe wasn't using as much data or analytics or really, understanding where the opportunities that they could control were. Have you ever been to a soccer game with like 7-year-old kids? And the whole team is just running around in a pack chasing the ball.
Yeah.
I joke about that it's like, okay, we got to get organized here because we feel like we're just chasing the soccer ball around, versus what it would be like to watch, Man United play, and it's very strategic and, systemized and whatnot. So there's just so many variables, and this is where Derek gets really good about helping to really quickly clarify for operators exactly, here are the KPIs, here's how you impact them, and here's the result you're going to get.
So, Derek, how much? There's so many questions I have here. I want to talk about inflation because it's everywhere on the map. What's your take on this whole inflation thing? I want to hear from you because you are one. I'm feeling that smartest guy in the room, kind of thing here.
Holy cow! Thanks, guys. Jeez, this is really nice. Yeah, inflation is it's always been a very difficult part of the restaurant business. It's the key reason why we, increase menu prices, that and labor, right? So inflation has always been a very important thing to look at, but it's no it's no surprise like that it's one of the number one problems or issues, I guess, that we're dealing with right now as an industry. You're looking at cost of goods inflation at almost double digit, if not higher than double digit increases in certain categories. That's a big problem. That's something that we really need to pay a lot of attention to. And unfortunately for the industry, the tactic that a lot of management have used in the past, owners and executives, is to increase menu prices. But I just went out for dinner on the weekend. I'm looking at chicken wings that are $18, $19 Canadian, right? Burgers that are $25 to $26. I would say that we've reached not a cap that we've imposed on ourselves, but a consumer cap, right?
Do you just I want to get on that because I agree with you, but do you think it still can go a little higher? Because I'm not going to name the company, but I had 2 subs yesterday that was $50, and I'm somewhat okay with it.
Okay,
right?
with it because I'm curious in what you think about that, because like $50 for 2 subs, like. I'm curious to know what you mean by okay with it. Is it?
Well, it's the part that I didn't like it, but it is the part where it's like, okay, I get it. Like it's like I don't like it, but I'm dealing with it. And I just wonder if this, because I agree with you. I used to call it the ceiling. We've hit the ceiling on a lot of these menu items on a lot of restaurants. But when does that ceiling then become the benchmark in a sense? It's not the ceiling anymore. Like, does that take time? Do you find, Derek?
Yeah, I mean the best way that I can answer this is you look at general inflation on your salary, right? So salary typically can match inflation in the market, and I would say that in the last, call it 2 or 3 years, I don't think, this is just me guessing, I don't have this as a hard fact, but I don't think that the majority of salaries have matched cost inflation in the market. So I think that's a big challenge.
So there's a question to you on this then. Mm-hmm. Sorry, Jim, I'm talking all the time.
Oh, but I've got a comment when you're done this one. I've got a few.
I just think it's interesting because I agree with you. I don't think the wages have, but do you think people are reducing their spend though in other areas? Right?
Yeah, and I want to answer this objectively, so I don't have hard data in front of me, but what I can tell you is that, having, recently, just before this, I was in a position as the head of business intelligence at a fairly large restaurant group, and we could see the impact on covers, right? I mean, it's I think a challenge that the industry is going to share moving forward. I think that people, it's hard to get people to increase their frequency in your restaurant, but then when you get them there, it can be a little bit easier to maintain that frequency. But what we're seeing right now is that people are making fundamental changes in our purchasing behavior. Companies like Moneris will give us good indicators of that sort of purchasing behavior. Even like MasterCard and Visa have data to show us purchasing behavior and purchasing patterns. And there's a lot of indicators right now that are showing that people are spending less money on things like dining out, right? I mean,
Really?
I think that industry in general is, still doing it. They're doing pretty good, especially when you compare it to how the industry has done over the past 3 years. But it's something that I'm definitely concerned about when we're raising prices to this level. I think it could have industry-wide ramifications if we don't try and, control that inflation, the price inflation. And again, that's just sort of my opinion, but I think there's some objective fact to that as well.
So, Jim, I want to throw this. Oh, sorry, Jim. I have a question too on this. Sorry, I'm going to beat you to this.
About what's
you're going to go?
I was reading this morning what's happening with, Bank of Canada, whether they're going to continue to raise rates and that kind of stuff. But if you fundamentally think about, why interest rates go up, really it's to encourage people to change their habits, right? And if we sort of connect that to what's happening with pricing on menus in restaurants, I mean, I was having a conversation with a group that we've been working with that runs little pizza restaurant, little takeout pizza spots. And I think this is one thing that for anyone who might be listening, there's a key takeaway around this concept is that if you're not paying attention to what's happening with how often customers are coming to your restaurant and how they're spending, you can really miss a few things. So this little group, they were noticing in the last 2 weeks, and so we've started to expand this analysis. Mm-hmm. In the last 2 weeks, they served 300 customers more than they did last year in the same 2 weeks. That's, they're not a huge company, so that's a big difference.
That's a big difference.
Their average customer was spending $7 less.
So that's my question to both of you.
It's like 30% less for them.
So there's a question for both of you on that then, Jim. Is what's the casualty in the restaurants? What is it? Is it liquor? Is it desserts? What is it?
Well, I think a good example, Derek, if you don't mind if I go first here.
Go ahead.
We were out for breakfast on the weekend, and Eggs Benedict was $26.
So sub looks like a deal, eh, buddy?
Right. So Eggs Benedict was $26. So we both ordered the just regular breakfast that was still like $18. So it's, I think where
we're trading down
is going to be is that, people still want to go out. And this is my, like Derek said, this is my sort of personal sense on this in terms of some of the stuff we're seeing, but there's still people are wanting to go out. There's ramifications from being locked up in our houses 3 years ago, right? Or 2 years ago or whatever, but there's still lots of companies that are seeing increases in customer count. Some aren't, but lots are.
Yeah.
They're seeing a change in behavior around how people spend. A $40 steak is now $52. That's out of price range for some people.
Yeah, I've seen that recently. In Niagara, the prices are crazy on some of these steak prices.
I don't know, Derek. What's your take on that?
Well, what I can definitely talk about objectively is examples that I've seen in the industry where, obviously cover count is down, revenue can be down. Average guest check is one component. And when I'm talking about covers, one interesting thing that I've seen is that average group size. When you're looking at number of guests per check. Table efficiency values, like they're declining as well, which is a really interesting thing to look at. And I don't really have a objective reason for why that's the case, but it's an interesting observation to see that, in two different groups that I've worked with that, we've seen cover count decline, guest count per check decline. On the average guest check side, definitely some of the key things that I've seen is reduction in the number of starters or appies per check, and table duration declining. So that one's an interesting one to me, and one that I could, I think there's a pretty good conclusion there, which is that guests, the appies, number of appies and starters have declined, the number of drinks per guest have declined.
Yeah.
Maybe just the whole experience has just been shortened because people relate table duration to the number of dollars that you're spending potentially. I'm not entirely certain.
But that, it's interesting you say that, Eric, because I think the idea also is the conversation's changing at those tables if you're out with someone as well. typically there's a phone in your face as well, right? And I'm just wondering if that's shifting from that time. But I also think restaurants are changing that experience. Some haven't, I guess, increased their experience value on that experience when they're going out for a dinner. They're going like it was 1980 again. There's no wow in that experience. So you go there, you feed, you leave. And the faster you eat, maybe the portions are smaller now because inflation or whatever it is, you're in and out to a degree. So I agree with you on that. The question I have for both of you on this is, what do restaurants do now when they see this behavior change? You guys want to share a few tips?
Jim, you want to start with that one?
Jim's
yeah, maybe I'll chime in first because Derek can probably expand on this, and I think him and we probably think about it similarly. I think.
Okay.
For me, it's really about compartmentalizing information, right? You got to really understand if sales are down, is it covers or is it average spend? Like Derek was saying, if average spend is down, is it length of time? Is it a promotion that's being run? Is it portion size? Is it, even something like time spent in the restaurant? Well, you could argue that that's because prices are higher, so people are ordering less courses. But you could also argue that that's based on the fact that restaurants are doing this 2-hour minimum or 2-hour maximum, reservation time that they didn't used to do before. So really, I think compartmentalize the information, find out exactly what's happening and why, or as much as possible why, and address it.
Any tips, Jim, on getting people to sit longer in your restaurant?
I mean,
to allow them to pay or what?
Well, I mean, there's an example, and we've talked, Derek, you and I have talked about this, and Jay, you and I have talked about this too, this concept of workload in the restaurant industry.
Yeah.
And I saw it firsthand in a restaurant I was in Toronto last week, where the staff were so spread thin that they were having to work so hard just to give basic service that it was taking people 20 minutes to order a drink. So they couldn't, even if we wanted to stay longer and have another drink, we couldn't because there was no one to order from. Wow. So I think, if you want to increase the length of time that your customers are in the restaurant, the first thing I would suggest is if the schedule's tight, just make sure that you can actually serve the people who you actually have coming into the restaurant. Give them an opportunity to order something.
Make sure you have staffing, eh?
Right.
And then I went to a place where it was the opposite, where there was too much staff on, not enough people in the seats, and then the service level was going down even worse. And then I was watching them just stand there. Yeah. Blew my mind. Derek, what's your take on this?
Yeah, I mean, with regards to table duration, it's a curious, it's a curious metric, right? I think that there's nothing to say that there's a correlation between increased revenue, increased profit, and table duration. Table duration can sometimes suggest that the guest is having a better time in our restaurant, but I think that is, like every metric in the restaurant, is very nuanced in in what it's saying. I think that if you're a restaurant where you have an 1.5 hour long lineup at the front door, do you want to be recommending a dessert at the end of the meal? I don't know, to increase table duration. These are just very fundamental questions that we need to be asking, right?
See, back in the day, it was so much about flipping the tables. Flip it, get another one in there, flip it, and stuff like. So is that still the case, or is that not the case anymore? Like, do you still want to flip your tables as much as you can per night, or is that changing? Like, what's your formula on that one?
I don't have one. It's very customer specific. It's I think it depends a lot on the concept. It depends on like what guest experience are you trying to achieve here? If you're looking at like a Michelin star restaurant where it's 15 courses and that that's very different experience than a quick service restaurant, right? Obviously. So it's hard to answer that question because I think it's very specific to the restaurant and the experience you're trying to provide the guest.
Jim, what's your take on? Do you find people still doing the table flips as much?
Well, first of all, Derek was the king of upsell when he was server. Some of the stuff he used to sell to people, I'll never forget. There was a scenario where he literally, and Derek, I don't know if you remember this or not. he actually told me that the guy tried to order a burger and Derek walked away from the table with filet mignon written down on the
Nice.
He was the king of the upsell. But
Nice.
I think, again, like Derek said, it's very concept specific. But I think if I was speaking to an operator in a casual fine dining or sort of mid-market type restaurant, what I would recommend from a training perspective is if there's a lineup, flip the table. If it's Monday night and there's no line, sell the dessert.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
When
okay.
you get a table, you would rather have 4 customers at $30 a head than an $8 dessert or $10 dessert. But if there's no lineup, you want that $8 or $10 dessert to sell, right? So I think it depends on what's happening in the business at the time.
It's a good point, Jim. Like on the dessert front, I know it's just one example, but I think it's a really good example of the way that data can help business owners make good decisions. One of the past jobs that I had, we did an in-depth profit analysis, contribution dollars per check, and related that to checks that had desserts and checks that did not have desserts. And what we found was that the checks that didn't have desserts on them, or I shouldn't say the checks, the hours where we sold less desserts, we made way more contribution, but that was only when we had lineups at the front door, which intuitively kind of makes sense when you see that and understand that a little bit more. But that's just information that we didn't have when we started. So naturally we just told servers, and when I was a server, it's the same thing: sell desserts, let's make more money, let's increase our average guest check. But what was happening is we were increasing the queue time at the front door. So it's difficult. You really just need to kind of pay closer attention, and hopefully some of these new tools coming out can help us with that a little bit more.
So Derek, what's the future then when it comes to companies like you have and the support you have for our industry? Are people more and more reaching out to you now, or do you see this continuing to change or shift? What's your take on the future?
Yeah, great question. I think that as an industry, I think that we are behind other industries when it comes to data analytics. I think that it's a bit of a scary term, but I am seeing a lot more multi-unit restaurants picking up data analysts, business intelligence professionals. Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure.
Like right on their team.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, for sure. It's and I work with quite a few individuals on the the more kind of technical side when it comes to like building out data warehouses and actioning the data a little bit more effectively. And they're getting busier and so I think there's a general sort of feeling in the industry, things like ChatGPT, generative AI, are just becoming very like interesting topics. And I think people are becoming more interested in data analytics. I don't think that, I think it's still going to take a little bit of time, and one reason for that, I think, is because, a lot of executives within the business have come up through the industry, right? And not necessarily come up through channels where they would be exposed to some of the more technical elements of like the software programs that are, coming out, right? Like with generative AI. I mean, it's something that I'm fairly new to as well. But I know through sort of past experience how much technology can improve productivity and efficiency, and proper performance measurement plans can improve efficiency and productivity and profit. I think that a lot of managers know that as well, but it's like, where do I start? What does this look like? I'm not a techie person. I don't know how to use Excel. How do I use data analytics in my business? So these are questions that we're hoping to answer.
Now, so this whole, we're a little bit behind. We're coming up into this. Is this going to be where we'll be able to almost base a lot of the analytics you have and stuff like that on new businesses, new restaurants as well that are opening up? They got to use you nonstop for those.
It's actually a very important question, because one of the biggest challenges that I've encountered helping restaurants set up performance measurement plans, dashboards, data analytics, is that their data didn't scale with their business. So I'll give you an example of that. Let's say you have a multi-unit restaurant, it's 100 units, you're all across the United States, and you have a different data warehouse I don't want to get too technical, but a different like place where you're storing your data in each region, right? And each region has their own configuration for for their POS system, different PLUs, all of that. That becomes a monumental task to bring that information, like to centralize that information and then be able to action it, especially because there's very few options in my experience that where there's an all-in-one sort of software solution where you have all of the data centralized already. Typically what happens is restaurants are using multiple pieces of software and the data is just decentralized and it's everywhere, right? So to answer your question, despite the fact that you might only have one restaurant, if your plan is to expand, do the legwork now, because data needs to scale with your business. Because if you are truly interested in data-driven insights, which I know is a kind of a cliche term now, but if you're truly interested in finding efficiencies, finding productivity, you have to start at the beginning or as close to the beginning as possible, because data can just become this nasty, we talk about data lakes. Well, this is like a lot of places like data swamps, right? Like you just don't even know where the information is sitting. It's not connected. It's nasty. We can still fix it, but it just takes a little bit more time and energy, right?
So you said earlier that Moneris and Visa and stuff have some information on more or less the trends of what they're seeing within your operations. Do they provide that to you free? Like, do they give that to restaurants? No, they don't. Not anymore. I think they did it.
No, but I would highly recommend a couple. And I'm not being paid to say this. I just found the information to be very useful. Moneris has a fantastic team. They're building out some really good reports. You do have to buy them, but for a multi-unit restaurant that has over kind of 10, 20 locations, I think it's extremely important to try and work with some of your payment processors to try and get that information and take a look at it. They just have so much information to show, like, what is your customer doing after they leave your restaurant?
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. Oh, MasterCard have that information for a long time, but it's
no way.
You need somebody to be able to analyze it. But I've analyzed the information from, I might have this wrong, but I'm pretty sure it was MasterCard, and it was very detailed. This customer was like, your customer base on a Friday night is typically, this X percentage male, X percentage female. This number of people go to an establishment after your restaurant. It'd
be great for golf courses.
Well, you know what? Actually, where we found it to be very helpful was determining whether or not our locations were pre-drinking establishments or like the main event, right? Pre-drinking is a lot different. You want to approach that a little bit differently than you do with other, if you're the main event, right? So finding out that like 50% of your customers are leaving your establishment to like another. And they'll even show you like categorically where they're going. We're going to a liquor primary location, right? That just fundamentally changes the way that you can execute on a Friday or Saturday night, right?
Well, it's just also what you're carrying for your menu. What's on your menu, right? If you're the main event or if you're the pre-show.
Like think about it. If the three of us went out for drinks on a Friday night, if it wasn't meant to be a pre-drinking night, it's going to be a different way that we approach liquor, food, shots, like additional whatever, upsells of whatever kind. Whereas if we know that our place, 50% of the people that come in are going to a liquor primary afterwards, well, we already know that they're in a position where they want to spend more money, right, on booze. So how do we keep them? Like, is this like a time where we bring in a DJ and like try and keep them in our establishment because they were looking to go somewhere else, Like, obviously, we're not the main place they want to go to. How do we become the main place? How do we keep them here longer? Those are some fundamental questions.
That's really good.
That is really good, eh? Mm-hmm. He is smart, Jim.
You know what? I just look at the information, right? That's the fun part about data analytics is that when you understand where to get the information and how to like transform it and look at it, it makes you sound smart, even though I'm not the actual. That's just the data speaking, right?
Well, it's always
how to look at it.
Well, it's nice to know that, Derek, because back in the day we used to get these analytics and we get this information, and then big companies that produce all this. I think a lot of people are starting to understand that they have to kind of give it to us in our language to understand what this means. Because we used to put these reports, I'd be like, okay, great. I don't know what this means. I have no idea what this means. or what I should be looking for. So that's great that you exist, because I think we need more and more of that. Because this stuff is, I'm sure there's like things that we don't even know what to look for. You need to look for in the data that you're getting through yourself or through other companies. So Derek, last question: Where do people find you? How do companies work with you and use your expertise?
No, thanks. I have a website, www.canopymetrics.ca. I'm on LinkedIn pretty heavily, and I love meeting new people on LinkedIn. There's so many people in our industry who are excited to learn more about data and performance measurement, and it's not about selling anything. It's about expanding, our networks, all of our networks, and talking to each other and learning new ideas. And I learned something from each person that I talk to. So it's been such a great experience so far. So I would say LinkedIn is probably a pretty good place to find me, and shoot me a message. I'd love to chat.
That's awesome. Jim, another smart guy you brought on. Another smart. Well, you're pretty smart too.
It's easy to pronounce. It's easy to spell.
It's easy. Right? Yeah, it's easy to pronounce. Yeah. Easy to spell. That's exactly it. We'll have you back on many times then, Derek.
Yeah, I'd love it.
Awesome. So Jim, do you want to just share also, Jim being Benchmark 60, everyone knows what that's. I just realized that your logo was on my shirt that Chris, the messages, had on at the Restaurants Canada show. It's pretty cool, dude.
Yeah, well,
I didn't even notice it.
Chris with the Burnt Chef Project tonight. So I don't know, Jay, if you were there to hear some of what we were talking about, but some of it is, this is for a whole nother episode, a whole nother show. Yeah. But basically what Chris and I did at the Restaurants Canada show last week was we talked about how team well-being and mental health, which is what the Burnt Chef Project does, how that connects to the business model in restaurants these days, what's happening, what turnover and retention, and from a data perspective, how that's impacting the business model, because it's changing.
Now, does that connect with your data?
Well, I would say so for sure. No, there's definitely parallels, right? It's there's better ways of being able to hold people accountable, and I think the old ways of holding people accountable are really difficult, right, and causing a lot of burnout and retention issues for sure.
That's incredible.
I'm glad you got a shirt, Jay. That's good.
Thank you. I get two. Look at it. I even got it on my thing here. Look at this. On my mic, I got the little Burnt Project.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, hey, Chris will like that. Anyways, first of all, I want to thank you both. Derek, you are brilliant in this. I'm just blown away. I'd be here all day. We'd have like 4-hour podcast if I went through all the questions I have here for you. But thanks again for what you do. We'll make sure we put your link into our podcast channel that people can listen to, and then link and then find you on LinkedIn and stuff. So I just thank you. And Jim, always a pleasure. Always a pleasure.
Happy to be back.
You're a pretty busy guy in the industry nowadays too. You happy to be back from Toronto?
That was, if you haven't, for those who are listening, and Derek, for you next year, if you haven't been to the Restaurants Canada show, it's a must. It was the best it's ever been this year, I think, too. So
I think it was rock solid. So, well, yeah, me too. I'm still a little tired, maybe. Anyways, Thank you both, and to everyone else, we'll be back again tomorrow on the SVK Network with our first Legal Bite show. Top lawyer in the industry is going to be on our show, opening up his new podcast series, and you get to ask him any question you want. Jim, might be some legal advice there, buddy, you want to tap into, eh?
I'll be tuning in.
Awesome. Thanks again, Derek. Thanks again. And we'll see everyone else later. Cheers.